Imagine this. You step off a plane in a country thousands of kilometers away from the Philippines, and the first thing you hear is Kamusta po? Not English, not their local language, Filipino. And as you look around, street vendors, taxi drivers, even government officials, many of them understand or speak Filipino. Your brain goes, wait, how? Why? What if I told you there are entire communities, unexpected countries, and even surprising historical reasons behind why Filipino is spoken far beyond the Philippines? Stick around, because by the end of this video, I'll understand how Filipino ended up being one of the most widely understood Asian languages in places you least expect, and the story is honestly wilder than you think. Let's start with the first country that shocks almost everyone, Saudi Arabia. No, Filipino is not an official language there, but walk into a mall, a hospital, a restaurant, chances are someone around you knows Filipino. Why? Because Saudi Arabia has hosted one of the biggest Filipino communities in the world for decades. At one point, the Filipino population there became so large that children growing up in Saudi households often learned Filipino from their Filipino nannies, helpers, drivers, and nurses. Now imagine being a Saudi kid raised by a Filipina yaya. She teaches you how to say opo, how to count in Filipino, maybe even sings you bahay kubo to sleep. These kids grow up understanding Filipino culture more than some people expect. Filipino becomes a language of comfort, familiarity, and childhood. That's how languages travel, not through governments, but through people. But Saudi Arabia isn't even the most surprising. Let's go to the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Here, the Filipino influence is even more visible. Restaurants have Filipino menus. Banks have Filipino-speaking staff. Announcements in some establishments even include Filipino translations. In fact, some Arab business owners specifically learn Filipino because Filipinos make up such a huge part of the workforce. And here's the funny part. There are stories of foreigners in the UAE using Filipino phrases like sandali lang, Sig, salamat, because they overhear it every single day. Language spreads organically through daily repetition, community, and economic connection. Now let's go to a completely different part of the world. Northern Mariana Islands, Sipan, Tinian, Rota. Here Filipino is not just spoken, it's practically everywhere. About 35% of the entire population is Filipino or of Filipino descent. Businesses, government offices, even radio stations frequently use Filipino. There are places where you can walk all day and hear more Filipino than English. It's one of the few places in the world where Filipino signs, Filipino food, and Filipino conversations blend naturally with the local culture. It's not an immigrant language here, it's a community language. Next up, Guam. Here's where it gets interesting. Filipino has been spoken in Guam for hundreds of years. Back in the Spanish colonial era, Filipinos were already moving to Guam as soldiers, workers, and migrants. Some Chamorro families have Filipino ancestors from generations ago. This led to Filipino words mixing into Chamorro language itself. The linguistic connection is so deep that some Chamorro words sound strikingly Filipino. The result? Filipino is no longer just an imported language, it's part of Guam's cultural DNA. But let's go even further, Japan. Wait, Japan. Yes, Japan. There are Japanese kids today, especially in areas with large Filipino communities, who understand Filipino because they were raised by Filipino mothers or half Filipino families. Some train stations, clinics, and community centers even offer Filipino translations. Japan's government started providing Filipino language support for residents because the community grew so large. It's the quiet kind of language spread, not explosive and attention-grabbing, but steady, generational, and real. And then there's South Korea. If you think K-drama fans only exist in the Philippines, think again. Filipino families have been forming communities throughout Korea for years. But the most unexpected twist? Korean kids learning Filipino phrases from their Filipino teachers, church groups, and playmates. Anong ginagawa mo? Wag ka Diane. Halika dito. These phrases echo in Korean households with Filipino parents. And some Koreans even pick up Filipino because they work closely with OFWs. Let's cross to Canada. Here, Filipino is one of the fastest growing languages in the entire country. Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Filipino signs, Filipino stores, Filipino community centers. In Winnipeg alone, Filipino is so widely spoken that some locals joke it's the unofficial third language. Canadian kids grow up with Filipino classmates, Filipino teachers, Filipino neighbors, and the language becomes familiar to them. A language becomes powerful when it's spoken in everyday life, not just classrooms. But we haven't even hit the biggest twist yet, because there is one group of people who speak Filipino in places you would never expect. Foreign soldiers, American soldiers, Japanese peacekeepers, even UN personnel assigned in conflict zones. Many of them picked up Filipino during joint exercises with Filipino troops. Some learned Filipino because they trained in the Philippines. Some learned it because Filipinos became their closest allies. And some learned it simply because Filipino is fun, expressive, and easy to pick up. Imagine a U.S. Marine shouting, "Tara na," or a Japanese peacekeeper telling another, "Huwag kadayan." It happens more often than you think. So why does Filipino spread so easily? Why do other countries end up speaking it, even if unofficially? There are 3 simple reasons. 1. Filipinos are everywhere, not as conquerors, not as colonizers, but as workers, caregivers, teachers, sailors, nurses, engineers, people who serve, support, and contribute. People who bring warmth into households around the world. 2. Filipino is emotionally sticky. It's expressive. It's warm. It's relational. It's easy to learn. Even 1 week with a Filipino nanny can teach a child opo, halika, salamat po. 3. Culture spreads faster than history. Languages don't travel because of governments. They travel because of people. Because of songs, jokes, tender moments, shared meals, friendships, and everyday life. Here's the part most people don't realize. Filipino is not spreading because the Philippines is trying to dominate linguistically. It spreads because Filipinos create connections. And connection is stronger than politics. Some countries speak Filipino not because they have to, but because they want to. Because the Filipino language carries a piece of kindness, humor, and humanity that stays with people long after Filipinos leave their country. Filipino is spoken abroad not just as a language, but as a memory, a feeling, a culture carried by millions of Filipinos around the world. And that is why, in the most unexpected corners of the planet, in languages far from home, you'll sometimes hear a small voice say, "Kamusta po?" And suddenly, home feels a little closer.